Well, today I have Christina of Orthodox Family Life. Would you want to do a little introduction to yourself? Introduction for
Sure.
yourself?
Sure.
For the people.
Sure. My name's Christina. I've been Orthodox for about 30 years. My husband and I have 4 children. We've homeschooled them all, and we just have one left at home. And now I have a YouTube channel all about Orthodox family life.
Awesome. And yeah, well, the stream that just happened, you were asking me if I needed a break between, but I thought I was about to end it, and then people were like, let me on, I got something to say. So I was like, okay, yeah. And then conversation was good, but I heard the crying baby, and I'm like, there's laundry that needs to be done, and dishes that need to be unpacked, and I'm hungry. I could use some more coffee. So I was like, all right, you guys can talk. I'm gonna go help with the house for the next hour, I guess, until I do this again. That's
good choice. Family life has to come before
life. Right. And that's part of this tension, trying to build an audience and make content. And it's not only a struggle with me of like wanting to do more creative work, something that's more of like a project that you take time and energy and you pour yourself into. That's kind of where I want to get to, but I do think that there's a tension between that and if this is something I'm doing and spending my time on, then it'd be easier if this was like something that could be like a living or something like that could produce some kind of income where it can justify its existence and justify this effort. Because I could be spending time with my family. I could be doing house projects. I could be taking more overtime. And I am doing that kind of stuff, but this is something that I don't know if you could say I feel called to. It's something that I've wanted to do with this kind of creative stuff. And then last couple years, especially since COVID, I mean, Mana was just talking about how COVID is something we all need to keep in mind, how that has changed so much. But I became aware of Orthodoxy in 2019. I had the first time I ever saw Jordan Peterson was actually in person. My brother-in-law was super into him in 2017, 2018. And he was going to see him in person, and he got me a ticket. And so I saw him in person, and then all of a sudden he's everywhere. And I read his books, and then through that I started reading Dostoevsky, and then eventually I saw Jonathan Pageau in 2019. So Dostoevsky, Pageau, like my first steps in the Orthodox pipeline. And then I went to my first liturgy beginning of 2020, and then COVID happened. Really weird time to be an inquirer. I was at an OCA church that, as I became more aware of Orthodoxy and having more conversations and meeting people online and all this stuff, saw problems in that parish and problems with the priest. Like the priest told me, never call me your spiritual father. I'm not your spiritual father. And there was different. Yeah. But I mean, at the time, like, I'm going to liturgy. I'm going to the catechism class, having all of my Protestant arguments destroyed. Like, no, it says right here that they consummated their marriage until, and then he's like, well, this word is used there, and then how the different saints interpreted this, and it's like, okay, well, I'll get back to you. And it's just a week after week of all of my intellectual efforts to defend I was never like more proud to be a Protestant when I was in catechism class, like trying to defend my faith, because I defended it against atheists in high school and in Roman Catholics, and now I'm butting up against this Orthodox priest. I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't have any answer for that. I'll get back to you. I'm not admitting defeat, though.
Yeah, it's a very common story among men, especially young men now, right? But it's a very different experience, I think, for women coming into the church. We deal with things more. It's more like about the experience that we're having, right? It's kind of the intuitive experience, and I think there's a lot of content out there for guys like you, which is wonderful, and it needs to be there. But we definitely need to do better at making content for the women and speaking to the our experience and the beauty of the church, because I think that's what women are looking for. I don't know that there's very many women wondering about the Third Ecumenical Council, as important as that is.
Yeah, definitely not as much of a. I'm reading through the Fathers right now pretty slowly. I'm on like the second volume of Shaft, and I think it depends on your mentality, because I think a lot of people could be puffed up, like, I've read the Fathers, I can quote them, I can do this. But I think that a proper longing to read the Fathers is like, if you put your mind in the shoes of like an early Christian that gets a letter of Paul and like you haven't seen it before and you're able to hear like like a Blessed Father's words for the first time, like why wouldn't you desire that as a Christian? But it's in our context of like, we have busy lives and we're trying to have careers and all that. So it's different. I don't know.
Yeah, it's wonderful to read the fathers, obviously, but I think it's more important, and this probably should be obvious, but it's more important to apply the fathers, their teaching to our lives. And I think I heard a quote recently. I don't remember who it was, but it was one of the bigger Orthodox fathers online. But they said something like, and it might have been a saint that they were quoting, but it was basically, everyone is full of quotes now. Right. Your head is just so full of quotes, you can't actually do anything. And so that is a temptation for people. And I think there's something about family life that brings you back down to earth, and it's where the rubber meets the road, and you have to actually start applying these things, or you become somewhat split in two, where you have your intellectual, thoughts going on about the fathers, and then over here you've got family life where you're not applying them, and really they need to come together and have an informed family life, a family life informed by the wisdom of the church and the experience of the church.
Right. So you have to actually incarnate the things that you're reading instead of just having them end up being like some kind of Gnostic knowledge, Platonic forms in your mind.
Yeah, it's better to read less and do more.
I agree. I mean, it's better. There's definitely been times I wake up and instead of getting right to my prayers, I'm like, oh, let's get back to the book. I mean, that's a rut I've been in before. And I had the experience of when I was a catechumen, having this long prayer rule, and then 6 months after being baptized, it's fizzled out really hard.
Mm-hmm. I think we all go through that. It's okay. These are all normal things. It's not a criticism. It's just we all go through those cycles.
So I was thinking we could just start the conversation with like, what are the temptations or issues or challenges that an Orthodox family would have, and are there issues, challenges an Orthodox family would have that a secular or a Protestant or like a heterodox family wouldn't have?
So I saw this as the title, so I sat and thought about it for a while, but the way you just said it was a little different.
It is a little,
but and that's okay. Answering the question you just asked, I would say an Orthodox family has to be okay with being different, because no matter where you are, you're going to be different. And you have to learn to maybe embrace that a little bit. I think this was actually on my list anyway, but one thing, I grew up in the punk rock scene in the 90s, had pink hair and a nose ring and Doc Martens and the whole deal at 13, leather jacket. And what that taught me, being in the South, and in that time, it was very awkward and unusual. But it kind of prepared me a little bit for being different. I already felt very different internally from the people around me, and then having that expressed externally created a lot of situations where it kind of solidified my identity as being on the outskirts and being different. And so when I came into the church, this idea of the fasting and everything looks quote unquote weird to people outside the church, maybe it didn't bother me. It was actually helped draw me to the church. And so I think that's different probably for a lot of people that I see that are used to following different trends, whether that's online trends or, the latest movie or the latest toy. We have lives that are centered on trends and constantly changing and constantly going after the next thing. And I think that's something that can be a hurdle for family life. Like, you have to be okay with being the weird people.
Right.
You're going to maybe not go to a dance on Friday night that your homeschool group is putting on because it's Friday night and there's no fasting food there. Right. Or going and not eating, or, something like this. So there's going to be times where you're not trying to make your orthodoxy show, but if you stay faithful to your own personal, spiritual regiment, then it's going to show sometimes, and that's going to put you on, the people are going to notice.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge hurdle.
There's definitely been situations that me and my wife have gone in since becoming Orthodox, where we're trying to like actively in this situation figure out what our not roles, but like what should our conduct be. Like we went to a friend's wedding, and we did. It was a Protestant friend. They're Pentecostal, and we didn't know what the service was going to be like. But it started off with like 30 minutes of praise and worship, Protestant songs, and my wife and I were pretty uncomfortable. Everyone stood up, and they have guided like prayers that they were all going through. Like the guy with the guitar was doing. It was funny because we were sitting next to a mutual friend with the guy that was getting married, and he was an atheist. My wife and I decided to sit down and just quietly do our Jesus prayer in the crowd, and the atheist stood up and was like participating, which I thought was like, we're surrounded by Protestants that would look at this and say that we're probably in the wrong, that the atheist is going with the flow.
Right. And that happens in a bunch of different ways, whether it's the toys that come and go. And so it's a very different experience of raising cradle Orthodox children as a convert. Right. There's like, God willing, this is the only generation in our family that this will happen, right? Everybody else will be raising cradle. So it puts you in a really odd position. And so I was always trying to help them to see that, we're going to be different than the outside culture. We were homeschoolers. We were the only homeschoolers in our parish for quite a while. And then the only Orthodox people in our homeschool groups. But I remember one time there was the Webkins. Do you remember the Webkins craze?
Vaguely, like little stuffed animals.
Yeah, they were little cheap quality stuffed animals, and they came with a little code, and you'd put this code into their website, and then you can play with your virtual animal that matched the stuffed animal. And
like
if you didn't feed it, it would die, and you could hook your animal to your friend's animals. And so this spread through our homeschool group like wildfire. And I had to tell my daughter, we're not getting one. And it was really hard. And it wasn't that it's a bad thing necessarily, but I just told her, this is stupid. It's an ugly stuffed animal. It's not a quality stuffed animal. I'm not going to have you sit on the computer and feed a pet. We have real pets that you can go feed, like if that sounds fun to you. And it was really hard for her at the time. But later on, because I know that's a trend, right? And it's 6 months and it's going to be something else. And that doesn't ever stop. So you're trained as that as a little child. But we see that now with, grown women, right? Or TikTok, right? There's always some other trend that everyone just kind of does and without thinking about it. And so that's what I was trying to break down for her was wait 6 months and you're going to see that it's ridiculous and stupid and that there's going to be the next thing. And so
being able to see that it's just a wave crashing on the beach and there's another wave instead of just being in the waves.
And that, that probably makes me seem kind of crazy, that I would make such a big deal over a dumb stuffed animal thing. But I kind of stand by it. I think we have to think more deeply about how we parent and the bigger implications of what we do.
Yeah, I'm not there. So I have a 2.5-year-old and a 1-month-old, both daughters. So I think about how, there's lots of ways that I'll have to figure out how to parent these children that in a lot of ways I won't relate to them like on a experiential level. Like I'm the third child with 4 boys. So obviously I'm raising girls. I didn't have even a sister growing up. They're going to be cradle. I was Protestant. There's all these different dynamics, but so I'm not quite at the stage yet where I have to make these kind of decisions with that. Right now, it's like impulse control and don't hit. And my older daughter's actually really good with manners. She says thank you and please without being asked, and we're like, oh, she just has the Southern gene. That's good.
Yeah. So I had 2 girls and then 2 boys, and I always tell people that. And my son watches the show, so he knows I love him. But when he came around, I realized that I wasn't as good of a parent as I thought I was, because girls are naturally sweet and obedient and will just do what you tell them. And then you get a rascally little boy, and it's a whole different ballgame. So, maybe you'll get there one day. That
right. Well,
but it's a nice way to start. It's nice and easy with the girls. And
The
that
biggest, my oldest daughter, it's you can't, I think I have to like get out of my head, like she's not trying to I don't think she's consciously trying to manipulate. It's like she sees buttons and she can like press them, of like right now she has like 4 different blankets, and sometimes like then our baby has like 2 blankets, and my daughter, when I put her to bed, is always like, I want this blanket, no, I want that blanket, I want that blanket. I'm like, you this is your blanket, you're going to sleep, this is your blanket. She starts freaking out, and I'm like, not getting mad. You're a baby. You're 2-year-old. I
yeah.
don't think you're trying to mess with me. Obviously, you're just a kid.
No, they're looking for boundaries. They're looking for the adults in their life to tell them what the boundary is, and so they're going to continue to press until someone says no. Like, no is such an important word for a child. And I mentioned in another stream that I went to Cabrillo College for early childhood education, and this is the college where they developed the anti-bias curriculum back in the 90s, right? And so part of that curriculum was an entire class on how to get kids to do what you want without saying no.
Mm.
And kids could be hitting each other, but you were not. They had a daycare attached to the school, and so you could go and teach and learn how to do this. But the idea was that you should never tell a child no. And I think we're actually seeing the result of that now with
it's like a sales mentality.
I'm sorry?
It sounds very much like a salesman mentality. Like you're trying to only like cultivate positive feelings. You shouldn't say no. You shouldn't critique. You should just try to. It's like the how to win friends and influence people is what that sounds like to me.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing from people in the business world that are now hiring these kids, because now they're entering that, they're probably about your age, Mr. Westwood. But when you've never been told no, or you've never been told that you've done something wrong, then you're not really teachable.
Right.
Right. And so now you have all these people entering the workforce who think they know everything and think they do a great job at everything. And actually it's quite opposite. And that's hard for them. It's actually not their fault. Right. But I digress. No, and setting those boundaries is really important. And how you say no, of course, you don't have to be mean about it, but a child does need to know that you're in charge, I think.
Right. My wife and I ran an in-home daycare together she ran it for 6 years, and I helped on and off, but I was pretty much full-time for the last 3 years. So there's we had up to 12 kids at a time, and there'd be behavior issues, and I would handle it. And then at the end of the day, we'd come together like, okay, let's go over the day. What happened? Why did that happen? What did I observe? How did I choose to handle it? Did it spark any emotions in me that influenced, and all those kind of things. So even after like 6 years of that experience with infants to 5-year-olds, like you can't, like with my daughters, like it's a little bit different because that was my work, and they left at 5. So now it's like I've had a long day, and my daughter's having some behavior issues, and it's 10 p.m. and why won't you go to bed? So there's the added difficulty, but it's still like, if you can't just give up, you can't give you have to put in your effort, even though you feel like, well, I've done this so many times. It's like, well, yeah, but your kid's always watching you, and they're always taking in what you're expressing.
Yeah, and your kids don't care if you've had a long day. They actually don't care at all. So, but that's okay. I don't want to paint it as being difficult. Well, the early years are very difficult. The later years are difficult in a different way. It gets more emotional, and it's not that physical exhaustion that you have in the early years, but they're also like the best years of my life. I can honestly say that looking back, I miss that. I remember the last car seat we got rid of. And so we had been doing car seats for about probably 18 years or something. And it was, we thought about burning it for fun or something, because it was just like, wow, we're really out of this stage now. This is amazing. So it's very difficult. And I think that's why we should always be very kind to the young parents. It's very difficult for them, but it's also so salvific, because it's protecting you from being selfish. If you've got little children to care for and you love them so much and they're so cute and adorable, like it's actually pretty easy on that level to want to give them, all of your love and care, right? it's a lot harder when they turn into teenagers and they have attitudes and, but when they're young, God is merciful. He makes them very cute, and it's, it helps you, but it makes you a better person. I really believe that.
What do you think about like this modern psychological idea of like self-actualization? Like the teenagers are really pushing boundaries and trying to find themselves so they can self-actualize.
I don't exactly know what you're
You haven't heard that
explaining.
term?
I mean, I have, but not maybe altogether like that for teenagers. But I do believe that I believe that kids mature a lot faster than we let them now in our culture. We tend to make the children more and more, we tend to let them be children longer, right? And so a 16-year-old, in my opinion, a boy, is really a man, and he should be, so let me back up a little bit. I'll just kind of explain my take on this. And Adam Lockridge actually explained this. He kind of systematized it and explained it in a conversation I had with him. He's the headmaster over at the school in Kansas City where Father Turbo is.
Okay.
So he and I were talking about love and obedience. And in the early years, you are trying to cultivate obedience in your children. I believe that's what you should be doing. And there shouldn't be a lot of explaining. It's just you're basically enforcing your will as the adult in the room. And in the middle school years, you're really giving them a lot of tools, and you're allowing them more freedom. And so there's this time of developing skills and manners. I'm sorry, that's the manners part, where they're learning how to appropriately relate to other people, but they do have more freedom, right? And then in the teen years is where you move into more of the skilled work. And these things might sound like they're not connected, but they actually are. And you're slowly giving your child more and more freedom because they learn to be obedient in the beginning. They've learned, and when they learn to be obedient, they can then do things. Okay, a child that is disobedient when they're young can't learn how to do things. And so if you want a 15 or a 14-year-old who can weld, you actually have to teach them how to be obedient when they're 4.
I see.
Because that's a basic skill, right? And then they learn to listen, and then you can trust them, right? You can't trust them if they haven't learned obedience, right? If they're always going off and doing their own thing. And so again, I'm not explaining it very well right now, but they're all related. And so in my mind, by the time you get to those mid-high school years, you really have a young man or a young woman. And so the dynamic is not, you're going to do what I say because I'm the parent. The dynamic becomes allowing them freedom to choose because it is their life. They're making decisions at that age that will affect their life, right, as they move on, whether it's to go to college or trade school or whatever. And you become an advisor, right? And if you've done it well, then they listen to you and they love you, and they know that you're not forcing your will upon them because you're a tyrant, right? But because you love them and you have their best interest in mind, right? And so this is just a slow movement from expecting total obedience to, to letting them launch, right?
Right.
And there's all kinds of caveats around obedience. That's why Adam and I did an hour and a half on that. So.
That's I think very important. I like can look at my parents and see how I mean, when I was a teenager, like in high school, I was in the punk scene, and all my paycheck went to going to see rock shows and all that. And I was like the one friend I had a car, so I would have to pick everybody up and drop them all off. And I spent years being like angry at my parents for different things and how they failed and all that. And my family, I think you were on the stream. I told my background a little bit with my brother who was sick and all that. So there's lots of grace that I've come to give them, much more than when I was 16. Of now that I have kids, how much more difficult it would be if one of my kids was going through a very prolonged chronic health crisis, and how that would weigh down on me and all that. But yeah, it was like my mom, when I was 18, she said, like, I'm done being your mom. Like I've done it. I've graduated. Like, you're on your own. And with my dad, I could probably count on the time on my hands, like how many times we actually like worked together on something like that. We were side by side and he was showing me something and like working. And I think that is what young men need. And I think that's a big difference between our society. And I think just the modern life in general has so many things about it that we don't think about, like how a young man would long to work with his father, and by 13, 14, he'd be out there side by side, as a blacksmith or whatever it was, working with him, learning a trade. And now it can be totally disconnected. I think a lot of people are not being traditioned down a lot of the skills that their dad, like my dad learned. He learned how to bunch of carpentry skills. He knew how to work on a car. He was a salesman, but he had a lot of things he probably learned from his dad. I didn't get. I think my older brother got a lot more of that because he was a teenager when my oldest brother got sick. So I think he had a lot of that. And my dad was dealing with a lot of grief when it would have been like I was of the age to be handed down that kind of stuff. So I mean that's affected me, like not to like complain or mope or whatever, but like I've had to consciously like try to get better, like using tools, and it can sound like really emasculating. But like I remember being 18, 19 and like trying to fix my car and just like my heart pounding because I feel so incompetent and useless. And like there's like one time my dad tried to teach me how to change the oil on the car, and he'd end up yelling at me. So like that, it's just like those kind of triggers or whatever. But I mean, I've gotten over it. It's one of those things that it took me a couple years to work on myself like that. So I think, and that's made me ponder like the fatherlessness crisis that we have here in America a lot, and how that's affected me. And I know dozens of men my age that had similar or even worse situations, like physical abuse and stuff. My dad never physically hurt us. He had my grandfather. Both my grandfathers, both my parents talked about how their parents physically abused them, but they didn't physically abuse us. My dad, I would say, probably like verbally or like emotionally abused, maybe. Like he'd if we were arguing about something, he'd like smash it and be like, okay, that now we don't have to argue. Or there'd be weird things like he'd come home for days at a time. We wouldn't know where he's at, or there'd be like some emotional, like a manipulative things. And I think about like that generational sin or curse, how it's progressed down my line or up the line, I guess, with my grandfather being physical abusive. My dad I remember he's told me, I looked at my father and I saw what he did wrong, and I said, I will never hit my kids. And he lived by that. I always wondered if my dad asked himself the positive question of like, what does a good man do? What does a good father do? And then try to adopt those instead of just the negative of avoiding the pitfalls. Because I think he still had that same kind of anger that my grandfather did. And I definitely have, I mean, that's why I was probably so into punk rock, had some kind of outlet to express that. And my grandfather, physical abusive, my dad, I had that anger that he let out, but he didn't let it be physical. And I think a lot of my anger has been self-directed. I self-harmed in high school, and
very common.
A lot of my anger was just towards myself.
Yeah, you brought up so many great things to discuss, important things to discuss, but I want to start by saying, how beautiful and important and critical it is that people are able to give their parents some grace. And not just because, once you are a parent, you see, oh, okay, this isn't as easy as it looks, but also this is like one of the first commandments with a promise, right? That you should love and honor your parents, that it may go well with you. And St. Paisios talks about how much spiritual harm he did to himself by judging his father. And so there's this is why I recorded a whole chapter from St. Paisios on respect for our parents. And it's not just little kids to mom and dad, but it's actually also mom and dad to grandma and grandpa. It's just super critical. And what doesn't make sense really until you get kind of deeper into it, I think, but super foundational. But the thing that you're bringing up really was actually number one on my list when I thought about the challenges for American families in Orthodoxy, or Orthodox families in America. Right. And that is the lack of extended family.
Right.
Um, so it's not just a fatherless crisis, actually, even though it is that in a certain way. We actually just have an utter lack of a family. And not everyone in America. So I think sometimes we're having conversations where we're talking past each other, because if you have if you have a great extended family, I know people in the church that do. A lot of Southerners still have their extended family around, and you might have a crazy uncle or something, but for the most part, they're pretty stable. Those people come into Orthodoxy and they seem to be able to embrace everything very easily. But for those of us that have different types of broken families, whether that's you're a child of divorce, or my parents stayed together, but my mom was severely to mentally ill, and so she was unable to work, and she would cut herself. You know, she would do self harm, and so whether it's something like that, or like you mentioned in your case, where your family has your parents or your grandparents have been in abusive relationships, and they're just not able to give you what you need, whether that's
Right.
physically or emotionally. And so I have a lot of love and respect for my parents. They both became Orthodox, and then they departed about 11 years ago, because I like you mentioned, my mom was severely abused over her entire lifetime as a young person, from childhood through her teenage years, by several people systematically. And so the fact that she didn't pass that on to my sister and I, that she never hurt us, that she had, I remember her having so much love for us, right? Like, that was a big enough cross for her. Like, it would be wrong for me to expect more out of her than that. I think God will judge her
Mm.
um, so gently, just for that, that she lived through hell, and her children still know that they were loved by her. Didn't know I was going to get a little bit emotional, but it's really important, right? but but what I've learned is that so my mom got sick when I was 11, and she went on heavy medication, lithium and Haldol, and she used to wear a path in the carpet from walking in circles. And so, it was just my sister and I. My dad was pretty distant, overwhelmed, I think, with what he was dealing with. So I don't really remember anyone taking care of me after that. Like, I don't remember ever having dinner provided or people doing laundry. Like, I was completely on my own. No one ever checked in on my schoolwork or anything. And so once I had children that age, like, I was doing pretty good up until my oldest hit that age. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I actually don't know how to talk to you, because nobody ever talked to me at that age. And yeah, sorry, I didn't know, like, I was gonna get
That's
kind of
Yeah.
emotional.
When talking about my parents and stuff, I was like, yeah, I had to compose myself, 'cause it's I mean,
It's hurt. It's a deep hurt, it's a deep wound that we all carry.
I mean, there's been years where people, like, I'm friends with people, and they ended up asking me stuff about, like, my upbringing and stuff, and it's okay. Well, okay, now I have to get into all of this, and it's not I always say it's not a happy story, and
I know that feeling.
yeah, and it's
I've
like
had
I'm not.
people start to cry when I tell them about my childhood, and I'm like, "I'm actually okay now, like, I have a really great life, like, you don't need to be sad for me," but it's for people that haven't been through really difficult things as a young person, it's hard to hear it. Um, so we've lost all these things that, as you said, should have been traditioned to us, right? We don't know how to be a mother or a father or an aunt or an uncle or cousins. Like, I don't have any of that, because a lot of people in my family weren't actually even safe to be around. They were actual predators. And so it was only my little family, my nuclear family. And then, one grandma. My grandparents actually divorced when my dad was a teenager. I think my grandpa got really sick from the war, and he burned the house down with my dad in it, because my grandma was leaving him, and said, as he's walking away from this burning house, he says to my dad, "Tell your mom she can have the house."
Wow.
So my granny was terrified of him, for months, and so we were never I never saw them together, actually. And until the day she died, she was terrified that, until the day he died, she was terrified that he would find her and hurt her. Of course, we only knew him as a really kind man, but our families are complex. It's not always like a good guy and a bad guy. Sometimes it is, but um, my point is, as Americans, we have this type of baggage.
Right.
I think there's very few Greek people or Russian people that have this type of stuff going on. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but when I look at like the Latino families in America, they're still very much cohesive, right? Like they have the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles. That teaches you how to be, as a young person is going through a certain stage of life, they have all these people they can ask, or the people will just come to them and say, hey, you need to knock it off, right? But we as Americans are doing this completely alone. And that's incredibly difficult, like really alone. And I think that this is what made me pray so intensely for my children, for my family as they were young, because I realized that I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't want to screw up. And so my main prayer to God for like the first 20 years was just, help me. I don't know what to do. And the amazing thing is that God, shows up when we do that. Like if we ask him to help us, he will. He knows like my whole life better than I do. He
Right.
understands that I don't have the skills or the ability to be the person my children need me to be. And so even though it's a really hard reality to accept, we shouldn't despair because God abundantly helps the orphan and the widow. Like that's his, we sing that every Sunday if you're in the Russian tradition or at a Greek monastery, like, the orphan and the widow are his beloved. He takes care of us. We just have to ask for it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Where do we go from here? There's a lot there. Yeah, I agree that in my experience and a lot of my friends and stuff, just it's not just like divorce and a nuclear family being split in twain. It's the extended family. Like I knew my cousins some of my cousins on my mom's side, like one of my uncles. I have 3 uncles on my mom's side, and I knew 2 of my cousins, and then they got a divorce, and I never saw my cousins again. And I never saw, like, I didn't even meet my cousins on another side I was like 13. I met them once, and yeah, I'd seen my grandma. One of my grandmas would come over every couple years, and she like sent us letters, but yeah, didn't really have any relationship with cousins, uncles, grandparents. And then, I mean, like I probably should call my mom more than I do, but yeah, we have a pretty, I mean, it's better now. Like hello everybody from Made by Jim Bob. We're kind of having more of a serious chat today. It's not the happy, fun, goofy time. Like
sorry, guys.
It's all right. Come be doom and gloom with us, I suppose. But what was I saying? Yeah, I think a lot of people are at a disadvantage and don't even realize that what we've lost with the cohesion in our family, and it's almost praised in a lot of circles of like I said, like self-actualization is a big thing in like the psychology world, and you have to help your young children be an individual and self-actualize, and really we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by not traditioning things down, by not being cohesive in our families.
Yeah, I'll go a step further and say it's actually demonic, the trend that I see now. And Adam Lockridge and I talked about this in our first talk on, I think it's called Division and Unity in the Family. And you probably know that there's a trend of going no contact with your parents, right? Yeah. And as someone that had very toxic family, I understand very well that there's a time to pull back. I moved from Florida to California at 18 by myself to get away from my family, because I needed that as I was becoming Orthodox, that I needed to learn what it was like to be normal. So that's not what I'm talking about. But the trend is encouraging people to look at their parents in the worst possible light, blame them for everything, right? And then cut them off. This is actually demonic. I really believe that. Like, this is so critical to understand. Like, if you have issues with your family, and they're, a safe person, again, like you should really do all you can to to be at peace with them, to, to call them, to tell them that you love them, to, not, this isn't about ignoring bad things that happen in your family, but it is maturing to the point where you can see that they are a human, they have struggles, they had sins, they have wounds, and you're in the same boat. Like, you also have all those things. And I really, really believe that if you want your children to love you when you're old and to be a part of your life, you have to do that for your parents. Like, you don't get to cut your parents off. Like, if you do that, your children are going to cut you off one day. I just believe that's like a spiritual law that's at play in this. Again, with the caveat that we're not talking about actual abusers or whatever.
Right. I think if nothing else, you set the precedent for your kids. Like, oh, well, that's what my parents did. If nothing else, it's that precedent that they can look to and have as an excuse to do it themselves.
Because our families are the number one people in our life that God gives us for our salvation. And when you're cutting them off unnecessarily, you're cutting off that way of attaining salvation. Like, that's a real serious thing, I think. So I could go on and on about that. We did a whole talk on that, on division and unity, and how to, and I will say that part of it, and this ties into our lack of extended family, but part of it is that many children or young people don't feel loved by their parents. They may intellectually know that their parents love them, but they don't feel that love. And that certainly is, I think, how I felt. And so Adam and I discussed different ways that you can actually convey the love that you feel for your children. Because again, if we, didn't get that love from your parents, then you don't necessarily know how to convey it.
Yeah.
Like, I remember my dad telling me he loved me twice.
Like, see, with my dad told me that, his dad, I don't think I ever told him that he loves him. And that really affected my dad. And my dad would tell me he loved me all the time, which was probably an improvement. But I think that, like I said, he didn't tradition down things to me. He wasn't like, okay, it's great. You can say you love me and you can give me a hug, but like, I'm 15 now and gotta start learning stuff, and I gotta start building skills and kind of need to know what it's like to be a man and have an example, not just an example, but like somebody who I can walk up beside and be shown and all that, actually have it traditioned down. And I think that's where I didn't get that. So it was like, it's like, I was really bitter for years for feeling I got the talk without the walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The short answer of how to convey love is to give your kids eye contact, physical affection. And for a teenage boy, that might be, roughhousing with them or messing up their hair or something. And focused attention. And if you think about the impact of phones on those things, right? If you have your phone here and you're talking to your kid, yeah. Okay, you're not giving eye contact and you're not giving focused attention, and that's really sending a message to the children. Even if you're saying something kind, it's sending the message that you actually don't matter as much as this thing that I'm reading right now. And that over and over and over again will impact your relationship with your child 100%.
There, when my wife and I owned a daycare, we had a 4-year-old boy. He didn't want to nap, so we just kind of hang out with him during that time when everybody else was asleep. And he just kind of started opening up and said, "My mom doesn't care about me." We're like, "What? What do you mean?" He's like, "She's always on her phone. She doesn't look at me. I have to say the same thing 15 times." Like, ooh. That's, and knowing her, she was a really nice lady, but she was the kind of lady who was always she was always rushing. Like, we got to get him to the game. We got to get him to this extra school curriculum thing. And it's, yeah, I think people can be too busy to realize, like, what are your real priorities, your real values? Like, is it better to get more things done and have your kids feel like you don't care? I mean, I know she wouldn't want that. Obviously, I don't think consciously she would think that's the result she's looking for. But that this 4-year-old,
these aren't always conscious decisions. Yeah.
I don't think he feels confident enough to tell his own mom that. I'm trying to remember. I think we tried to broach the conversation with her a little bit, or encourage. There's lots of those kind of dynamic things with all the different families we have, because we have families of different backgrounds and different parenting styles and things that they wanted. And there was a little bit of politicking of like, we can't tell people how to raise their kids, unlike certain legal things we can't do or say or whatever. Well,
yeah, it's difficult. It's really painful to watch a family struggle, with these things where when you feel like you can help and, they're not open to it, or it's, it's not appropriate for you to reach out for some reason. It's really painful to see whenever I'm in a restaurant and I see little 2 and 3-year-olds with a screen, like they've been given a tablet to play with so that they stay quiet so that the
right.
parents can have a moment. I understand that. Again, I had 4 young kids at, one point, like I get it, but you're stealing that opportunity from them. Like I could talk for an hour on why that's bad, and please don't do that. Like you should actually just take those tablets and throw them away and talk to your kid. Like your kid's not going to know how to have a conversation because you didn't stop and just talk to them. They don't know how to be bored in a booth at a restaurant because you always entertained them. Right. There's so much that a child learns just by sitting next to you. Your child learns how to eat properly by sitting next to you and watching you eat. And if they're staring at a screen, they're not learning that. And you can get into like eye development and brain development, dopamine and all that. There's a ton of things, right? There's no good reason. Like your 5 minutes of quiet isn't worth what it's doing to them.
Right.
So
it's much more selfish than you think it is. You should feel, instead of feeling like, it's, treating myself, you should feel like you're stealing from them, because that's what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I know I sound probably pretty harsh about it, but I'll die on that hill.
People are saying, I'll die on years, you can't do a lot. And I would say, yeah, but the weird paradox with that is I would break it down by hours. Like, okay, these kids are here 5 days a week, 10 hours. Okay, so we got 50 hours with these kids. How much time do their parents have? Okay, they have the weekends, they have the evenings, but they probably put them down by 8. So that's like 3 hours on the weekends, maybe an hour in the morning, and maybe they hang out with friends occasionally on the weekends. So even if that was like 10 hours there, like at best they're getting like 30 hours and we're getting 50 hours. So, and we'd have like kids call us mom and dad all the time. I'm sure that's common. And people even said like people probably have somebody in this chat probably has the experience of calling a teacher mom or something like that when they're 12 and being embarrassed.
Yeah, we all do that.
It was weird. There's lots of weird things that would kind of make us feel gross about the daycare. And we shut it down because my wife got pregnant, and we had mentors that had been doing it for 20 years saying the biggest advice was, and they taught us a lot about like business ownership and how to write a policy and work with people and all that kind of stuff. But their biggest advice was, do not raise children in a daycare that you run, because you're working 10 hours a day with all these kids. And by the time all the kids leave, you feel like you want to sit down and have a beer, but your kids are still there. Now you have the one-on-one time with them, but you feel like that's just more work, but now you're not even getting paid for it. And they had 4 kids that grew up in their daycare. And by the time they were teenagers, like, oh, we messed up.
Yeah. Again, a lot of these things we don't know as parents until, it's a little too late and we realize these things. But I wanted to go back to the devices and say something else about that. And that is when you give a young child a device like that, you can't really take it away. So whenever you introduce that, you're pretty much in it for the long haul now. And as we've already talked about like some of the negative things, everybody knows this already, right? But as they get older, of course, really inappropriate content becomes more and more of an issue. So it might not be an issue with a 2-year-old, but an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, for sure it's an issue. Like you don't have to go far to hear stories of young men saying the first time they were introduced to, the stuff, they were 10 years old on a smartphone. There's no reason for a 10-year-old to have a smartphone. There are a lot of.
If you want your kids to watch pornography, then give them a phone, is what I've heard.
Yeah, it absolutely will happen. And this really was driven home for me probably about 6 years ago. I live next to a monastery, and so people are always coming to visit the monastery. And so there was a certain 2-week period where there were a lot of people that I knew that came to visit, and then I had made a couple of trips. And so I saw a bunch of people that I knew that I don't normally see in a very short amount of time. And it was something crazy, like 10 of these moms opened up to me and said, my kid is cutting, my kid has a porn addiction. These are all Orthodox or Protestant homeschoolers. They were all either homeschooled or in a Orthodox school. These were all good parents. Some of them were clergy family. They were all people who go to church and who are trying. And every single one of those people told me that their child had been introduced to, different various activities, whether it's transgenderism or, like I said, cutting, porn addiction through the phone. I don't understand it anymore. There are so many other options. Your kid can have a phone, but this goes back to your kid's going to be the nerd. Your kid's not going to have the webkins.
Right.
So they're not going to have the smartphone. But I'm okay with that. Like, I'll take a kid like that has some issues with it every day over a kid that, you gave a phone to at 10 or 11.
Right. And
because the kids are also smarter. They're going to figure out the workarounds. You can say there's workarounds, but they always figure them out.
I mean, yeah, I remember being a kid and you can just, you have all the time in your hands and your little brain will just figure something out. Like, oh, there's a password lock on the computer. Well, I am just going to do every number and write them down. And in 20 hours, I will have busted this code. As a dad, you're just like, okay,
yeah.
All right.
And then there's all the things your kid isn't doing when they're on their phone, right? They're not learning how to weld, right? They're not learning how to sew.
Right.
They're not visiting sick or elderly people. Like, your life should be so busy in a good way that they don't even miss it. Like, my kids that didn't have cell phones, because I did give them a phone once they had an outside job. That makes sense to me. But if they're never away from you where you can't get a hold of them, like, why do they need that phone? Right. And so it's a tool. And so tools are used when you need them. And if you don't need them, there's no reason to have it.
Yeah, I agree.
I have a lot of strong opinions. I don't know what the chat thinks about this, but I'll keep going.
People are saying move out of California.
Well, I'm stuck here. I live next to a Greek Orthodox monastery. We absolutely love it. But we wouldn't be in we tried to leave California actually. And then through a series of family events, we were compelled to move here against our will almost. And now we love it. So it's okay.
I'm in Washington State, so I'm in another one of those blue states that everybody says you have to leave. And we've had, I don't know, a dozen families in our parish, like when COVID was happening, decided to go to other states because they felt like Washington was going to be too crazy. But we thought the Orthodox community here was so strong that we'd be taking a gamble, even moving back to the South where I'm from, because we'd been talking about that a couple years ago. We're like, well, I mean, we've been to some Orthodox churches where it's like it's an Orthodox church. Obviously, they have the sacraments, but you get the feeling that it's not a community, or there's not the extra cohesion that we were experiencing at our church that we go to now.
Yeah, and that's important for young families, and again for people that don't have extended family. I think it's particularly important. But again, we love it here. Our abbess was the spiritual daughter of Elder Ephraim for over 50 years. Wow. So we're feeling pretty good about it.
Well, I mean, the whole nation's been crazy blessed in ways that we don't comprehend by Elder Ephraim.
Yeah. So that's a whole other stream that I'm not qualified to talk about, but that's why we're here in California, if anyone's been wondering,
So you recently had a conversation with Jamie Henshaw, and I saw a couple ortho bros kind of like feeling there was like feminist tendencies being said in that stream, I think, with like women in the workforce and stuff like that. How do you think women entering the workforce has affected family life?
Well, that's not the question actually that we were discussing over there.
Right. I think they were. I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't exactly align with that. Yeah. And like,
so that's a different question than addressing what Jamie was talking about.
Okay, well then address what Jamie was talking about.
Sure. So what she was talking about was young women now who are unmarried, having a job. And I heard a little bit of the pushback on this. And so this goes back to our conversation about extended family, actually, because if you, let's say you're an Orthodox family and you've been Orthodox for a while, you you live in a community where you have a lot of like-minded people around you, maybe you want to lean into a more traditional, I'll say old world way of doing things, where you keep your daughters home for longer. I don't have any issue with that. I think that's a great thing to do. However, that's different than talking about 20-year-old women, 25-year-old women who come into the church as converts. And I think it's not really fair to them to hold them to a standard that they can't hold to. You know, I think someone said, "Why not stay with your father? Won't he take care of you?" No, my parents abandoned me at 17, actually. Like, that doesn't happen for everyone. So what about that?
I think there's like an ideal, but not especially in our atomized culture. That's like we've been talking about with extended family and nuclear family and just community in general. Like my family here was talking about how, you know, we used to be more like on similar work schedules and like we did more stuff. And now it's like you're working at nights and I'm working over here and like we don't actually spend time together, or like, and how that just is extrapolated across all of our friends and families and groups. Like there's probably been cultures that like when the men go to work at the same time, they come home and like all the women are it's a village, so they're closer together. And you kind of have like a liberal, like a hijacking of that. Like it takes a village. So that's why we're going to pump your kids full of hormones. But wait, why does it take a village to do that? I don't quite understand. But I think that the individualism that's seeped into our culture, and my wife talks about with like feminism, how she wonders, because we're both from like divorced families, broken families that we didn't really have the role models. Like, oh, this is what it is to be a man and a woman and a husband and a father and all that. She wonders, like, she's intellectually understands all the problems with feminism and the roots of it and all that. But she wonders like how much of her operating system has been infected with that in a subconscious level that she's not aware of.
Right. When I think Jamie and I discussed that, like as a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, and I was, you know, a smart little girl, was in the gifted program. Everyone thought I was college bound. And there was an enormous pressure on me to do that, as there was for my own girls who did some college and then decided not to. So I get that. Like we've all had a ton of programming. I just think the whole question around this is so bizarre to me. I mean, I just laid out like what I felt like were some really serious issues, like children and devices, right? But we're going to spend our time talking about 25-year-old girls who want to have a job. Like, I'm not their spiritual father. Like, I don't know their backstory. I don't know why should that concern me at all? I don't understand that. Now we can talk about ideals, you know, and I've said that, yeah, if you're talking about you're living in a Russian village somewhere, and the financial aspect is what it used to be, right? Like finances are different now, right? That's not anybody's fault. This is the world that we live in. The financial reality is very different than it used to be, even for people that had kids in my generation versus your generation. Like that's a real thing. That's a really difficult thing that young parents and young families are dealing with. So we can have ideals, but I don't know why we need to get into people's lives and tell them what they should and shouldn't be doing. I don't think that's Orthodox. I'm sorry. This is definitely a hill I'll die on. Orthodoxy teaches us to say, here's what I do wrong. Here's all the things that I need to work on. Not like, here's all the things you guys over there need to work on. Right. And it's one thing to talk about ideas and ideals. It's another thing to attack a person for the choices that they make. God help us. Like, I don't need that. I don't have any desire to attack anybody. Like, I feel like there's so much work to be done in this whole field of Orthodox family life. I have no time for that. So
I agree. Well, I mean,
I can get kind of upset about this. It's an utter waste of time, in my opinion. Again, you can have your opinions about it. There's a place for the discussion, but I don't see anyone freaking out about cell phones for kids. Could we talk about that maybe?
Yeah.
Because that's destroying millions and millions of kids.
Yeah. And that, I mean, yeah, there's tons of things, like we're really actually in a war. We're in a war actually, against the family and against the kids. Like, you look, if you just sit on your porch and you watch the kids, if there's kids on their bikes driving, like riding by, a lot of them will just like stop and sit on their phone for however long, and then they'll go off. And I've seen some weird stuff. I mean, there's a lot of grooming that happens just even in public. And, yeah, I mean, I've witnessed some weird things happening all around.
Yeah. So we've covered almost all the various problems that I'd written down for families, except for one, and maybe it ties into what the conversation we just had, which is an utter lack of philotimo, or sacrificial love. Like, this is a huge problem for families. And we don't have sacrificial love for each other because, again, we weren't raised with it, right? This is something we're learning how to do, and that's okay. It's okay to be there, but we should recognize that we have to have a sacrificial love for one another. We have to be willing to put down our own phone for the love of our children, right? We have to give our spouse the time that they need and the love that they need from us for love of them. And this is actually how we learn to love Christ more, right? And if we're so focused on everybody else, then we're not doing that. I'm sorry. I don't think you can be criticizing everybody in the orthosphere and then come home and really love your family well. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've been living the Orthodox family life for, we just passed 26 years of marriage, and the online world is new to me. And it's been pretty shocking to see what people are okay saying about each other. And if you go online and you say nasty things about other people, again, I'm talking about people saying things about people, not ideas. That's different. Then I don't know how you can come home and all of a sudden be the person you need to be for your family.
How could people acquire more philotimo?
Get offline.
People are too chronically online.
Absolutely. I've been pretty shocked by how many people I see, especially in the last month or two. I've kind of tried to look around and figure out what are the other Orthodox channels, what are they saying, because this is all new to me. And it's pretty shocking to see the same people over and over again, like all day long on chats and stuff. Like, I'm home all day long, so I can do this while I'm cooking or cleaning. But like, well, how is everybody online all day? Can someone explain that to me? How is it that there's men online like 6 hours at a time, like going from stream to stream to stream? I don't understand this. I don't think this is healthy.
My guess is a lot of it is like, it's on their earbuds or whatever while they're at a job. It's my guess. Because I listen to, probably 4 streams throughout the week while I'm at my work.
And I get that this is like different. I'm old. I get that. Like, the young people, this is how you interact with each other. And there's a lot of really wonderful content that is made. And I certainly listen to content while I'm at home doing stuff. I'm talking about the frequency and the amount.
Right.
Like, if you have a family, like, they need you. They need your attention. They need your time.
Father Turbo said that, the online stuff, like glory to God for Jay Dyer and all these different people, and DPH doing all this work and helping people combat with these ideas and start to struggle with coming to orthodoxy. Glory to God for that. But if you're not going to church, if you're not interacting in the spiritual life, if you're not being in obedience to your spiritual father, if you're not taking the sacraments, going to confession, all these things, like, that is your steak, that's your potatoes, that's your 4-course meal that's going to sustain you. And all the online stuff, especially after you've committed to orthodoxy, that's like your vitamins. And if you're just eating vitamins and you're not eating any of your food, like, you're going to starve.
Yeah. And we treat each other differently online than we do in real life, so even if you are doing it a little bit, I still think it messes with your concept of people. And like, I don't think people would say the things they say face to face that they say online. I just think it really does something to us as humans. It's like I do this because I feel compelled to help women. Like my channel is actually for women, and I am having a hard time getting other women to come online and talk about their family life. And I kind of understand why now. It's pretty harsh. It's a pretty harsh place to be. And I think that is doing something to us. And I think if you're in it for a long time, especially if you've grown up in it, if you're a Gen Z or millennial, like maybe you don't realize the difference. But I'm Gen X, and we're the last generation to kind of span both the analog world, where like before anything was out, and this increasingly online world. And the difference is pretty shocking. And so I would encourage people, like, go visit a monastery, go somewhere where you don't have cell reception, you're not online, and do real things. This will help you be a real person again.
I think a lot of people, when they first try to start doing that, they'll look at it as like tourism. Like, oh, this is a nice place to visit, this unplugging for a while. But I think a lot of people wouldn't look at it as, and maybe it would even just looking at unplugging from the internet and technology in general for a bit as tourism. And I think that would maybe help them lower the amount, lower the amperage of content that they're consuming. Because I think, like myself included, I think everybody consumes too much content online, and there's times where, like I being a high schooler in my generation, I spent a lot of time, especially like with family problems, a lot of times on video games. There'd be times where I'm laying in bed playing a video game, and it's 3 a.m. and I'm not even having fun, but I'm like, I don't know how to stop. I can't stop. I'm just like my brain's all on like burnt out.
Yeah, that happens to all of us, right? And that's not a way of being that you want to, habituate yourself to, right? Obviously, we all know this. But let me ask you about how has it been to start your family, right? Because congratulations, by the way, you have a new little one, right? Your second.
Yeah, second, Magdalena.
How's that going?
It's going good. I mean, because I don't have all of the main parenting stuff of dealing with teaching your kids, and I'm at the stage in parenting where I'm at with my kids are just have the base needs of having their needs met, eating and feeling comforted and all that. And it's a little bit different than me than a lot of like new parents, I think, because I had the years of working at owning a daycare. So like I've seen some stuff. I've seen all the bodily fluids and stuff, like changing diaper. And then I know people that like fathers that don't. They're like, I've never changed any of my kids' diapers. That's, I don't know. Maybe is that weird to me? That's weird to me. The not helping your wife with stuff like that. Because there's times like I every time the baby's crying and my older daughter's being needy, I feel a lot of. I think it's guilt. Yeah, I feel a lot of guilt of like I need to take a load off of my wife, who's like, I'm gone all day and she's trying to juggle all this. I come home and I want to relieve some of that. But I mean, it's good. Both of our kids are healthy, and the baby's chunking up. So a lot of where my headspace has been in it with that is just my wife and I's relationship and like the power dynamics that we're in right now of how do we get stuff done? How do we do everything on the house? There's tons of problems on our property. We didn't realize we bought more of a fixer-upper than we did. And there's a lot of time and money and skills that I have to learn to do all the handyman stuff here. And also like, hey, we haven't had a date night in 3 months. Maybe we should do that. So there's just trying to fit in all the life stuff. And
well, that's pretty good. Just 3 months. I mean, I think we went like 5 years without a date night. So
wow. Yeah, maybe you're selling it. It could be long. Yeah, definitely hasn't been since
people should go out. You should have a date nights. Yeah, that's a good thing.
And somebody actually just gave us a couple $100 to go on a date, and they're like, you have to go on a date now. Like, oh, yeah, okay. We were gonna go on yesterday, but we didn't. So maybe we will next week.
Yeah, it's easy to put it off, but you definitely want to keep that relationship, because and I think Jamie and I talked about this actually, like in your marriage, Christ has to be first. then your spouse, and then your children. And if you always keep those hierarchies in their proper place, then everything works out. In fact, I meant to mention Dr. Mark Tarpley is a friend of mine, and he is a PhD in education. He was on Orthodox Ethos with Father Peter once talking about education. I think it was earlier this summer. But he, in his doctorate program, found all the writings of the saints that dealt with education and with raising children. And he went through and he found that they all say three things. They all say the same three things. And then, depending on the time and the place, they have some other things. But would you like to hear the three things that you have to do as a parent and everything will be okay from the saints? This is a really great list. So number one, the parents have to pray. Do you pray? Number two, do you live the life of the church? Are you faithful? And number three, do you set a good example? And these things are so simple, right? But if you just, do these basic things, all the saints say, it's going to be okay. Pray, be faithful, set a good example.
Yeah, I think that's, again, it's always going back to the basics, the fundamentals. It's not, it's not complicated, but it's not easy to get up and do your prayer roll, to not get distracted, to like I said earlier, going through, like, reading all of these different parenting books and different systems and ways of thinking. Like we had to do ongoing education with their daycare, like having all that knowledge, but still going like, well, yeah, sure, whatever. Okay. Yeah. Give them the tablet. I mean, that's the, you can empathize with parents wanting that 5 minutes of break because they're tired. But it's the giving up your integrity for 5 minutes is giving up your integrity. Kind of have to have integrity all the time to have integrity.
Yeah. It's very hard. It's very, very hard to have young children, especially when you're home with them all day, every day. Like you said, it's incredibly difficult. I remember I had a very talkative first child. And so for the first maybe 2 years, the house is silent. It's just me and this infant all day long, right? And that was difficult because just me and this kid that's not talking right. And there's a lot of care. They're wonderful, but it's a lot of care. It's a very ascetical way to live in a way. And then she started talking. And then she wouldn't stop talking. And I remember just kind of crying to my husband, like, she won't stop talking, and so, but this all makes us better. We become better people by being patient and loving our kids. And they need to know that, there's a time to speak and a time to be quiet. And it all works out in the end. But you can look back on it years later and have a good laugh that, yeah, it was hard. But they really are the golden years, of my life, having all the young kids around. But you brought up parenting books. Can I say a few words about that?
Of course.
So there's a lot of really great parenting books out there, and there's a lot of really terrible parenting books, and there's a lot of books that are somewhere in the middle. And I would caution parents, and again, going back to parents that don't have extended family or a close family, that they kind of already know what to do. A lot of people go looking through different books for help. And I think you have to realize that when you pick up a parenting book, this is somebody who is outside of the church. They have a very different view of child psychology and development. And then you're layering those ideas on top of your own baggage, right? Your wife's baggage, the personalities of your children. There's actually a lot going on. And so sometimes people can take a book with some bad ideas in it, and they're good at kind of sifting through it and getting rid of the bad ideas. And some of us just aren't good at that because, again, we don't have a measuring stick by which to measure these things appropriately. And so I would just warn parents that books can be helpful, but we have to always measure things against what the church teaches. And there's a really good example of this. I don't know if you've heard of the book To Train Up a Child.
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
This was really big in the 80s and 90s, but it's still going around. It's still being published. I was able to buy a copy from an Orthodox bookstore, which I found a little bit upsetting. It's not an Orthodox book. It's not a book I recommend. So have you seen the Netflix? I think it's called Happy People. what's it called? Maybe it's not called that. It was about Bill Gothard, and it was a Netflix special about the people behind this book.
Okay.
And it was like a Protestant pastor. It wasn't even a pastor actually, but he created a an organization that would train parents how to be parents, and they had a homeschool curriculum. But what was interesting was that they didn't start churches; they just infiltrated other churches with this ideology. And so the Duggars from the TV show 19 Kids and Counting, they're part of that. The Quiverful movement is also part of this. And so the difficult thing with this book is that it's got some really great ideas, and it uses some words that we also use in the church, like obedience, right? It's a good thing. I just did a whole, hour-long talk with Adam on the importance of obedience for young children. But the way that they teach obedience is I believe, very harmful. And it was all about crushing the child's will. And, this is why it's important for parents to also know the theology of the church and the spirituality of the church. Because when you read things like this, it can be confusing. You're thinking, well, they're teaching obedience, right? And this is a virtue in the church. But it has a lot to do with the way that it's taught and the intention behind it. And so this book led to a lot of spiritual abuse in different families, and even actually sexual abuse because of the way that they have you structure your family. And so it starts off by sounding somewhat orthodox, right? Like, let's teach obedience, which is very out of fashion right now. And so it can be kind of a temptation for parents to lean on it. But if the parent, especially if the parent is coming at it with a lack of knowledge of Orthodox theology and spirituality, and a lack of a healthy family history, then these books can be really misunderstood. And I think they can actually be more harmful.
What would you, do you have any recommendations or advice for young parents that are going into homeschool or looking at public school and homeschooling and trying to figure out where to go? I saw some expert on Twitter last week saying that, like, railing against homeschooling, saying that no parents should be considered qualified to teach their kids, that there's no way they're an expert in 20 different subjects where they could be to teach. But I think he was rightly kind of criticized and ridiculed, because a lot of you don't really have to be an expert to teach high school math. Like, high school math's not that hard.
Yeah, so I actually did I think the last time I was on board No More with Mano, this is what I talked about, the 5 common concerns of homeschooling, and then Mano came on, we talked about a couple more. And one of them was this question of qualification. And so I broke the answer up into 2 pieces. So I'll speak first to younger kids through elementary school age, because all my children, I homeschooled them from kindergarten through some of them chose to go to college, and some were doing calculus 3 at 18, physics 2 at 18, and at the college level. They did really well, is my point. They did very well. And again, I'm a high school dropout over here. I want to reiterate that, with no kind of college really to speak of. And so for the younger kids, I would say, if you don't feel like you are able to teach kids to do long division, doesn't that say something about your own public school education?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like, you're saying these people that went through would be able to pass it on?
What's that?
The guy would have to be saying that all of these people that went through public school education didn't understand enough to teach it to somebody else.
Yeah. So that's, I think, the first thing, and a lot more could be said. But again, we're talking about elementary school. None of this is rocket science. You should know all of this stuff as an adult. If you don't know it, you should work on that, and you can work on it alongside your child, actually. Okay, so that's okay, right, too. For high school, we're really talking about something different. Homeschooling in high school changes, and you become much more of a facilitator. And so there were certain subjects that I taught, literature, for example, because when they are doing work at that level, depending on the subject, I want to be in control in the way that it's I want to be in control of the way that it's taught. So for instance, literature, I want to choose the books. I don't want them to read Clockwork Orange, actually, or even The Crucible. I think Jamie and I talked about that one. Depending on the age of the kid and their maturity and kind of what their struggles are, I want to be able to talk with them about literature, but talk about it through an Orthodox lens. Same thing for biology. The other sciences I don't have as much of a problem with, but biology I certainly taught at home. And I did a deep dive with my daughters into evolution and creationism and all the arguments there for both. But in the high school years, you're really facilitating, so you don't have to teach everything. And so math is actually my best subject, but I have a really great program that I use that teaches them everything. And for me, that was worth it, because if I have them in it was a computer programs teaching textbooks, so it's not online, but it does do the lectures and the lessons. So if they're doing that online without me, then I can use the limited time that I have to target the subjects that I feel like are most important for me to target. So if we're speaking about history, I would also do history at home. Of course, we're adding in lots and lots of Orthodox history. And if we're talking about the Reformation, obviously I have a take on that, right, as an Orthodox Christian.
Instead of telling them the enlightenment thing that happened to us, and now we're freed from the shackles of the dark ages.
Exactly. So you're making choices in high school, and you can farm everything out. I know people that farm everything out. I like to be involved, but also kids at that age, depending on the child, my boys tend to want to kind of be cut loose earlier than the girls educationally. And that's okay too. I still am in charge of making sure it gets done, whether that's through a co-op, online class, college classes. And so, again, none of this is rocket science. Like it's actually all very simple. A lot of people without college degrees do it all the time and have kids that are very successful in college, including kids that go to Berkeley, Cal Poly, like top schools. I know homeschool kids that went to top schools. So it is possible if that's something you still want for your kids.
What would you be any advice you have for a lot of people will have the objection of like, what about my kids being weirdos who are not socializing and getting the peer interaction? From my perspective, I feel like it's maybe Gen Xers or boomers a lot of times that don't understand the state of the schools. Because I remember even being like in sixth grade, being exposed to the most degenerate things you could think of. Like if you just read through like Urban Dictionary and see the most vile things like that, that'd be nice and whitewashed compared to the things I saw and heard.
Yeah. Let me come back to sheltering, because I also have a lot to say about that. A lot to say about everything. Sorry. But you said the question one more time is
that's allowing your kids to be
socialization, right? Socialization is the question. Yeah, I find it actually pretty funny that this is even still a question that we have to answer. We've always had to answer this question, but increasingly, I'm really shocked that people would even ask this. So part of the answer is what I said on Mano's channel was you should go to YouTube or TikTok and type in "Why are teachers quitting?" and listen from teachers right now, especially in the last 3 years, about why they're quitting and what they're seeing in the classroom. And it's pretty bad. It's absolute chaos. It's even violence. Teachers even being put into the hospital. And this isn't in a few schools. This is very widespread to the point where they're having trouble keeping teachers. So if you're going to make that claim that homeschoolers are going to be weird, you have to tell me also, why do you think it's going to be better in the homeschool? So that's the first thing. Just go and hear from the teachers themselves about the state of the school. Second, I would say kids are going to be socialized no matter where they are, whether they're at home or in the school. And the question is not, are they socialized, but how are they socialized? And I'll tell you a story. I dropped my kids off at an Orthodox summer camp once. I actually was on staff, so I stayed with them. But a very lovely lady who I love, she's a public school teacher, was signing them in, and she knew that we homeschooled, and she said, your kids, it's really important that homeschool kids come to summer camp because they don't learn the pecking order. And it's really important that they learn the pecking order in the world. And I was pretty horrified by this because there's no pecking order in the gospel. There's nothing about the public school system that will tell you how to appropriately relate to other people. Like how we're supposed to relate to other people, how we're supposed to be socialized in that way is in the gospel, actually. And the best way to learn how to properly associate with other people is through your family. And there's nothing normal about having 30 kids of the same age only talk to each other for 8 hours a day, 180 days a year.
Right. That goes back to us talking about like it was much more common for a young man of 12, 13, 14 to go through some kind of initiation ritual. Now he's a man, and now he spends his time with the other men doing things shoulder to shoulder instead of today, those same young men are with one man or woman and 30, 40 of people their same age instead of being lifted up.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So there, I talk about this on Manos thing is there's group dynamics at play. So if you have a whole bunch of children the same age, they're actually going to sink down to the lowest maturity level and behavior level of the youngest kid in the class or in the group. Same thing happens for women, but that's a whole other discussion, actually. But if you have a mixed age of children, everybody actually is elevated because the young kids are trying to act older for the old kids. The old kids go into mom and dad mode. And so what you see is the language and the behavior. Everything rises up when you have kids in a multi-age situation.
Some of the things that we saw when we were doing our daycare was like the second and third children would learn certain skills faster than the firstborn, because and I think maybe just being in the social setting of the daycare helped it too. But seeing their older sibling and wanting to, get up and run around with them and all that, and even talking and certain things like those things, they would learn faster than the firstborn who was just them and their parents.
Yeah. And that could also be just the parents getting better, or I also think that once you have a child or two, it becomes easy to parent the latter kids in a way because you've established a family culture. So for your first child, you have to teach them that you have to obey, you have to listen to mom. When I say come here, you must come. You can't run away. And but by the time the third kid comes around, like they just know that, like because they see the other two reacting that way, right? And so I think as you're developing your family culture, it gets a little easier in that way. Like this is just how we as a family do it. But I'd like to go back to sheltering, if I could, for a minute, because I think homeschoolers often get unfairly blamed for if a child goes off the deep end right afterwards. This is pretty typical. If you were in Protestant circles, you probably have seen this before, where you have a child who isn't allowed to do anything, and then they're cut loose and they go to college or something, and they go completely wild.
Blue Like Jazz.
So
that movie.
What's that?
There's a book and a movie called Blue Like Jazz. That's that young Protestant man, super sheltered, goes to college and gives into hedonism.
Right, which is a real concern. That really can happen, but tons of kids coming out of the public school system are going crazy anyway. So I'm not really sure why that would be an issue in that sense. But here's my take on sheltering. Children are like plants. And if you've had a garden before, if you've started seeds at home, you know that every plant, every different type of seed needs a different incubation period. They need, a different amount of moisture, light, warmth, right? You keep them in these little tiny cells inside or in a greenhouse, somewhere very protected, and you give them everything that they need for that particular plant. Tomato is different than a cabbage, right? So you give them everything they need to fully develop to their full potential, right? Now, if you take that really tiny little seedling that you've put all this effort into, and you just go put it in your garden, it's going to wither, right? I think we all know this. And so it has to go through the hardening off process, which is a slow process of taking your seeds outside and slowly over time habituating them to more and more of the outside world, right? And so this is the process that I think we often don't talk about with children. So I absolutely think young children should be completely sheltered from negative images, behaviors, the dark things of the world. There's no need for them to know any of that.
Like, just let them be kids. Don't. I think they should be protected from a lot of the adult world.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I didn't even like my kids to go to the grocery store with me because they'll go by the aisle as you check out, right? And it's got Vogue, it's got some sexualized woman. As they start to read, they can read like, 7 new hot sex tips. It's like, well, do you really want your 5-year-old to read that and to see that every time you go to the store, right? They're being habituated to it. And so this hardening off process looks different depending on your situation, depending on the child, within a family, but it's really important. And so again, it goes along with those different stages of obedience we talked about and how a child grows, that you want to slowly introduce these things to them on your terms, right? Where you can talk about it with them. So if your child sees something at the grocery store at 10, 11 years old, they see a man dressed up as a woman, okay, you're going to have that talk with them. But you don't want to go from being the seedling to just putting them out in the world. That's where kids wither. That's where kids go crazy. But if you have an open and honest conversation and increasingly amounts of, serious topics, right? Like, explaining abortion to a young child for the first time is really hard to watch, right? They're really devastated by it. And they should be. Like, that's actually the response you want. But you also want to walk them through the arguments of the other side. Again, I'm talking like high school level now, right? So that when they hear it from the other side, it's not the first time. Like, you've walked them through those processes of thinking about how to think about these different issues.
Yeah, I think especially like a high schooler, I think you should. I think over sheltering them would be just teaching them creationism and Genesis without looking at evolution. Like, that would be, and then when they hear evolution, this is just what people think, and this isn't academia, then they're much more likely to feel like they were kept away out of fear instead of like, this is, let's look at their arguments as best as we can and steelman it and see that has all these issues. We can read Creation, Early Man by Father Seraphim Rose, and this is what the fathers have taught, and this is the arguments on their side and the problems with it, instead of I think we shouldn't, as parents, operate out of fear.
Right. Because the church actually has a good answer for everything. Right. Specifically with the creationism, I knew what the church's teaching was on this, and we did a little bit of that, but we actually tried to come at it from more of a scientific point of view of the intelligent design movement. Right. So that when they went to a college class, if the professor said, creationism, intelligent design, that's just creationism, and they're only using the Bible to prove that, that's actually not true, right? There's a lot of evidence for intelligent design. And so, we did a kind of a deep dive as a family into that at that time. But I think that's a good model for people to think about. You just don't want their first experience in these things being in the world, right? Surrounded by worldly people with very different ideas. I think you want to walk them through it. Of course, you can't do this perfectly. At some point, you have to trust that your child will come to you and ask you about it. But that's kind of how I would answer the sheltering question.
What are your thoughts and feelings on sleepovers? My wife and I are pretty skeptical about sleepovers.
Absolutely not.
Have a lot of stories, and my wife, I was allowed to do sleepovers, and I never really experienced anything too weird. But my wife, definitely things that were traumatizing from staying at other people's houses and stuff. And I don't know, we're talking about it, and these are the things that we don't have to deal with yet. But yeah, I'm closer to like the absolutely not. Like, if anything, they can stay the night here, but then the other parent has to trust me, and I don't trust them. And
yeah, and that gets hard, right? Because if you let some kid come over, and then the parent's going to be like, well, it's my turn to host, right? And you have to kind of break that to them. That's difficult. It's much easier to just have a blanket rule. What's that?
If my kid's coming over there, I'm going to bring my sleeping bag. I'm coming too.
Yeah. And, there's just, you have to look at kind of the cost benefit analysis on this, and there's no benefit. It's fun, but we were really careful we were really careful to have a very fun life for our kids. We went hiking, we went canoeing, we did all kinds of crazy things. We would enter races with gravity cars, and they made a gravity car that looked like a dog sled, and one kid dressed up like a Russian, and the other kid was like a dog in the dog sled, and we made life fun. And that was really important because when I said no, or when my husband said no, we meant it. And they needed to know that we saved no for things that mattered.
Right.
And so if my kids had a crazy idea of something they'd want to do, it'd be like, absolutely, like, let's figure out how to do that. To the point where I had one kid that wanted to hike from Mexico to Canada. They were a huge hiker. I'm totally freaking out inside thinking, this isn't safe. How's this going to turn out? It all turned out in the end. They ended up not doing it. But being willing to like help your kids do fun things and to follow their interest is so important, because again, then they're going to know that when you say no, you have a real reason. You're not just being selfish, right? And this goes back to that sacrificial love. Like, if you're always saying no because you want to hang out with your friends, or because you're on your phone, or whatever, you're too tired, then the kid is just like, well, mom just always says no.
Right.
For no reason, she says no.
Yeah. I think it's what you're saying is really important. Having fun with your kids and having them be excited and have like a zest for life, because I think there's a tendency for a lot of people coming into Orthodoxy and seeing aestheticism for probably for the first time, and feeling that they need to be like completely dead to the world, but they're laymen and they have families, and then they get into like conspiracy stuff and seeing like all the propaganda and stuff with Disney and seeing like, well, it's kind of weird, Disneyland. Maybe it's like this weird Gnostic reality if we go in and we're pretending to enter in another world, and it's like we're not really living in reality like we should, like the fathers say. But I don't know. There's a priest that lives a half hour from me, and he just took his family to Disneyland, and he's having a good time. And I think that people can be like, okay, yes, it is wrong to worship Disney stuff or worship entertainment, and I think there are people that do that, but that doesn't mean that you can't participate in it and also not go to the extreme of worshiping it.
Yeah, that's a great example. So there were definitely Disney movies that I didn't let my kids watch. One was Little Mermaid, right?
Right.
You want to make a guess about why?
My guess would be the father-daughter dynamic.
You got it. Good for you. And I mean, come on, she's wearing a bustier of shells. Like, is no one going to talk about that? Like, that's also not how I want my daughter to dress. So we're not going to do that. But yeah, like, she disobeys her father. Everything goes wrong, just like he said it would. And then in the end, he apologizes to her.
Right.
Did you notice that? Yeah. So absolutely not. We're not going to do that. But there were other movies that we allowed. And so you have to kind of pick your battles, right? We didn't want to say you never get to watch any movie. All of our kids watched all of the Star Wars. They loved Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and things like that. So you just have to pick your battles. Like, for me, that was more important to cut out some of the stuff like Harry Potter we didn't do, or some of the darker Disney stuff. I think especially now, I think I did let them watch Maleficent, but like I stopped it every 5 minutes and like talked to them through it. And they were a little bit older at that point. But for a young kid for that movie, absolutely not. So you just have to be thoughtful. I think this is what I try to say over and over again, is you have to be intentional. If you're on autopilot, that trance that you get when you're playing video games, if you're in that mode, like as a parent all the time, these things are going to, you're just going to go along with the flow. And the flow is always more sexualized, more commercialized. So like, I didn't let my kids wear T-shirts with Disney characters or any character. Like, they're not an advertisement, actually. Like, you should just wear normal clothes. Like, it's ridiculous to see adults wearing,
I had to get rid of all T-shirts like 5-6 years ago. Like, oh, I'm not a teenager anymore. Yeah,
I mean, there's we're all human. Like, we go through these stages, but part of maturing is like being mature. Like, if you want to be a holy and pious grandma or grandpa, then you have to kind of get on that road as a middle-aged person and start acting like an adult. And again, we make people into children for longer and longer. Like, adults didn't go to Disney World for themselves when I was little. That wasn't a thing.
The annual passes.
Right.
And
Yeah. Like embrace being an adult. It's actually really awesome to be an adult, right? To be responsible and to have fun and to watch your children grow and mature. The it's like the best thing ever, you know? There's nothing as good as that.
Well, I had other topics that we could talk about. We're at the hour and 40 minutes. I don't want to take too much of your time away. I've been doing this since like 10 a.m. with the other sermon I had. So ears actually hurt from wearing this. Is there anything,
Yeah.
any other topics, anything that you wanted to broach, anything you feel like we've talked about that could have gone deeper before we close it off? I don't want to go more than 2 hours. So another
Yeah.
20 minutes.
No, you've been at this all day. It's okay. So the last thing I'd say is a little bit about my channel, maybe, and why I do what I do. So on my channel, you are going to find my opinion about things, and I'm, pretty opinionated, so you can take that or leave it. But part of the missing link with extended family, that whole conversation, is also that we know our Orthodox faith in an intellectual way, but I think we often don't know what it looks like fleshed out in real lives. And so this would be, of course, the lives of the saints and the writings of the saints. So that's what I really tried to put on my channel, is different saints that are helpful for women and for families. Saint Aquilina was the one for either today or yesterday, a new martyr of the Turkish yoke. And that one, there's just this really beautiful quote where the mother has encouraged her to her martyrdom. And after she comes back all bloodied and she's dying, the mother kind of frantically wants to know, did you keep the faith? And the daughter says this really beautiful quote of, oh, mother, what could I do but that which thou hast taught me?
Mm.
Cuts me to the heart. Like, that's what we need as mothers and as fathers. We need the encouragement of the saints to see how they treated their children, to see how they raised their children. And this exists in the lives of the saints, but it takes a while to dig it out. And so I'm kind of doing the digging for you and putting these very important stories of families and women martyrs for us to emulate.
That's why, that's part of why I chose Tsar Nicholas as my patron saint, because I was married. We didn't know it. My wife was pregnant when we didn't know that she was pregnant when we got baptized. So yeah, but wanting to have the example of a strong man who a father, who's a husband, that would lead his family and lead them to what I think we should all be teaching our kids, especially in the Orthodox faith, that we hope that none of us are martyred, but I like just you explained with this. What was the saint's name again?
Saint Aquilina. She's a fairly unknown saint, but Aquilina, yeah.
You want to be instilling and traditioning the strength into your kids, where they would be martyred and not give up the faith, because that's the highest thing in their life that they can't do. But
yeah, and Saint Sophia, who was I believe last week on the new calendar, Saint Sophia and her 3 children. When I first read her life, or maybe first heard of her, I thought that she obviously her children were martyred first, and I always thought that she was martyred after that, but actually she wasn't martyred. She which I think was such a powerful detail, in that she had to, theoretically she would have gone home and had to live her life seeing her children's things around her and like being constantly reminded. And of course your motherly human instincts would grieve over that. But she has this really beautiful exchange the night before her children are sent to martyrdom. And she lays out our faith in such a beautiful way, where she says, basically, there are 2 paths. There's the path of Christ, and there's this other path. And the emperor's going to entice you into the other path he's going to promise you all these, I think it says something like, all the beautiful and vain things of the world. She acknowledged that it's going to be hard. He's going to offer you, wealth and honor, a good marriage, everything, but it's vain, and it will all pass away. And I don't think very many of us talk to our children this way. But we need to get used to thinking in those terms, to laying it out for our children, that there's 2 paths, and we try to stick to the path of our Lord. And there's going to be things that are pulling you away, and trying to always be mindful of what we're doing, and are we being pulled off the path to Christ. And so that's why these aren't just random stories that I picked. These are stories that um, are helping parents to see that, how do we talk to our children, and how do we relate to them properly. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, if anybody here is in chat watching, you can find Christina. Her channel is in the description. All right. Well, if is there anything other closing thoughts before we go ahead and close up shop?
No, thanks so much for having me. You had a long day, so I appreciate it. And yeah, if you ever want to talk again, I'd love to. I'd love to talk to Mrs. Westford if she's ever around. I really am trying to talk to the ladies. So if there's any ladies out there that want to chat, some people are emailing me. You can find my email on my YouTube page. But I'm more than happy to hear from the ladies.
All right. Well, I'm gonna try to stop being chronically online, and I'll start that. It's a beautiful day outside, and I've experienced it not at all. So, Christina, thanks for coming on, and I'll see you around. We'll see you on Board No More, I'm sure. Everybody go subscribe to Christina and Orthodox Family Life, and everybody have a good day.